Nintendo, a household name, and a company synonymous with just one thing.
I've got lots and lots of memories of Clacton, staying at my nan and granddad's when I was like 7, 8, going to the arcades. That was like early 80s. So back then, you had a lot of mechanical games. Arcade games were just coming in to sort of more popular. I always remember this one game. It was a shooting game. It was like a war game, and it was a massive screen, and it just played a video of these planes going across from behind these cliffs, and you had a gun. You had to shoot them down. Very primitive sort of duck hunt type of shooting game, like air light gun game. And we used to play. Me and my brother used to play that for hours. But my first sort of real addiction, if you like, to arcade games was Ghosts and Goblins and track and field. We used to go to a holiday camp in Hunstanton every year. So this was like mid-80s. And used to get £1 worth 10p's to go around to the arcades, and I'd just literally just do all my money on Ghosts and Goblins and track and field. But yeah, that was sort of the golden age of coming into the golden age of arcades. Home consoles, we had an Atari 2600, got one up there still, and used to play Combat. Me and my brothers just play for hours. Most simplest game you can imagine, going back and playing it now, it's just weird to think that it captured our imagination and attention for such a long time, but we used to play for hours and hours and hours. And that was our first sort of thing. I was ZX Spectrum computer as well. I used to try and program my own games, and it never worked because there's always some misprint in the magazines when you used to type them in from the magazine. There's always little bit of code that went wrong, so the games never worked. But yeah, so that was sort of my history with. I'll start off with games. My favourite game ever of all time, and again to go back to Ghosts and Goblins, was my first sort of real addiction. I've played it thousands of times and I still haven't completed it. I've done the first circuit, never got round twice. It's sort of one of those things that I don't think I ever want to finish, because then I feel like it'll be over. But yeah, no, Ghosts and Goblins, I used to spend hours, and I could get so far on 10p that it was good value for money. So, but yeah, that was my first real favourite game. Still play it now on emulators. Just given up collecting for the Mega Drive, which was that was where it really took off in terms of gaming for me, because that was when the 16-bit came in, and home gaming became equal with arcade gaming, and it's just that sort of nostalgic memory thing for me. The Mega Drive, I was always Mega Drive, never SNES, but I've collected both. I've given up collecting both over the years, and it's just, I find I want everything but I can't have it, so I've decided to stick with the PS1 as my console of choice, and that for me is my favourite console of all time. PS1, just game changer. Played it to death. So many great games, so many memories from them years when you had the time to just sit and play games until you sort of fell asleep with a controller in your hand. So PS1 definitely hands down favourite console. Yeah, I was never a Nintendo fanboy, but obviously you're aware of Nintendo. Like, I had a Game Boy for many years. Tetris was always not far away from me. You know, I was always having a little game of Tetris. I remember one game actually, Revenge of the Gator. It was a pinball game on Game Boy. I was absolutely obsessed with it. Basic as you like, but it was just one of them things that captured your imagination. Super Mario as well on Game Boy. But for the main consoles, I did try collecting SNES for a while. Had some really good box copies, but gave that up in the end. But no, I was aware of Nintendo when I was younger, and the console wars between Sega and Nintendo was prime my youth. Always a Sega fanboy rather than Nintendo, but it's not that I didn't respect Nintendo. I had mates who had Nintendo who used to go around there and play it. It's just you had to kind of make a choice back then, because gaming's expensive. So yeah, that was my choice. Always noticed a few, Donkey Kong in the arcades, was a staple. So definitely aware of the company. But yeah, never really sort of was a fanboy. So it's a really good question, because as with most things in life, things just happen and change, and you don't really notice until it's happened. Gaming's become, I'm still game like as much as I ever have done. Always get an opportunity to play games, but I tend to focus on ones I like and try to, although I've got a pile of shame that's ridiculous. But yeah, I mean, the move to digital has changed the game in terms of, I don't think I've bought a physical copy of a PS5 or a PS4 game. So, that's changed how we game much more. There's much more an online presence than when I was growing up. Something I've never really got into. Is much more. I feel like it's much more of a youngsters thing, playing online. With the Fortnites and sort of the MMOs and all that sort of stuff. It's never something that I've ever got into. But yeah, the rate of technology it appears to have slowed, because the jumps between platforms now aren't as pronounced as they used to be. So the very gradual changes, but stuff's so advanced now. It's hard to pick up the technology changes unless you're really into that sort of thing anyway. But yeah, that's it.
The year is 1889, and Fusashiro Yamauchi created a company selling Japanese playing cards called Hanafuda cards. These cards were invented due to the ban of regular cards in Japan due to its link to gambling, which was heavily forbidden at the time. Then, in 1933, this company officially changed its name to Yamauchi Nintendo. However, after World War II had ended, the ban of playing cards had been lifted, which meant sales for Hanafuda cards started to decline and production slowed. A few years later, Fusashiro Yamauchi's grandson, Hiroshi Yamauchi, joined the company and became CEO. Once more, the name was changed to Nintendo Playing Card Company and signed a contract with none other than Disney to print their characters on their cards. Yet, this partnership did not aid Nintendo in their slow and declining sales at the time, so they decided to go a new route, away from their traditional playing cards. They then changed their name once more again to simply Nintendo Limited and looked into different business ventures such as packaged rice, taxis, and even love hotels, but unsurprisingly, none of these paid off. However, during these different ventures, they made their first ever toy, the Nintendo Beam Gun. This would be an ancestor to the NES Zapper for games like Duck Hunt and Hogan's Alley. Then, in 1972, Nintendo entered a partnership with Magnavox for making optoelectronic guns, similar to that of the Zapper for the Magnavox Odyssey. And as a part of this partnership, they got the rights to distribute the Odyssey in Japan. Then, in 1977, they entered yet another partnership, this time with Mitsubishi, to create their very own game console. The NES, the family computer, The Color TV Game 6. Not exactly the most exciting name in the world. It reads basically as a bullet point list. It's a game console that plays in colour with 6 different games on it. This was the first of 5 systems in this line. Color TV Game 15 was more of the same, just with more games. Color TV Game Racing was a system with a racing wheel on it that exclusively had car games built in. Then there was Color Block Kazuchi that just had Breakout on it. Then the last of the line was simply a remake of Othello. Nothing special. However, this was the very first game console Nintendo ever developed and published themselves, away from Mitsubishi. A huge milestone for the company. The year is 1980, and one of Nintendo's chief designers, Gunpei Yokoi, is driving a bullet train in Tokyo. On this train ride, he looks over and sees a man playing with his calculator out of boredom. Seeing this gave him an idea. This led to the creation of the Game & Watch, once again a bit of a bullet point list. It is a game and a watch. It had an LCD screen on it, which meant it had images on the screen that are lit up at different times to create the sense of motion. A screen similar to that of a calculator. It also had a watch feature, so it could feature as a pocket watch as well. They sold exceptionally well for the time, selling 43.4 million units with over 60 versions coming out. The first being Bull, with the mascot in it being Mr. Game & Watch. Then, 1 year later, they released Donkey Kong, their first huge success. The initial plan for the game was to have Popeye characters be a part of it. However, a few months before the release, they couldn't get the rights to the property, so made their own characters. Donkey Kong, the large ape antagonist, Pauline, the damsel in distress, and Jumpman. However, his original name was Mr. Video Game. Once more, Nintendo with their incredibly original naming conventions. However, you might know him as something else. Mario. Yes, this was confirmed by Nintendo after the release of later games that Jumpman is canonically Mario. The way he got his name was actually during a brainstorming session. Nintendo of America's landlord came in and demanded rent, and this Italian man name was of course Mario. Donkey Kong was huge and massively influential. In fact, it was the first game to ever include jumping, so technically making it the first ever platformer. The year is 1983, and Nintendo is about to release their first ever privately made home console with interchangeable cartridges. You might assume it's the Nintendo Entertainment System, and you wouldn't technically be wrong. However, that same hardware, just in a slightly different enclosure, released a whole 2 years previously exclusively in Japan, called the Family Computer, or Famicom. There was of course plans in the works to get this hardware to the rest of the world, especially the US. However, the next year something happened, one of, if not the most important event in video game history, the video game crash of 1984. By this point, video games have become a hip new trend and everyone wanted in on the action, but that was just the thing. Everyone wanted in. And the market was absolutely flooded with poor quality games and consoles, with strange controllers and all games looking near identical. The people were burnt out by them and they stopped buying, so retailers stopped stocking them. People started to think video games was just a fad and would die out soon. So, Nintendo brings in It doesn't market itself as a video game console due to the stigma around the term at the time, instead a toy, tagging it in with Rob the Robot on the Nintendo Zapper, tricking both retailers and consumers, and it blew up. Selling tremendously just about everywhere and had some of the most iconic games of all time on it. Mario vs. Zelda, Metroid, Kirby, all series that are still around to this very day. Then, they decided to revolutionise a whole new market a few years later with the It followed the Game & Watch for Nintendo's handhelds, yet included interchangeable cartridges as it was far more powerful. The Game & Watch's power was most similar to that of a calculator. This is an actual game machine. There was thousands of games for this console and started many series like Kirby, Tetris, and, you know, Wario Land 2. Oh right, yeah, and Pokemon. This console lasted years, and not getting any kind of successor or redesign until 1996, which is crazy to think about when the screen they had to deal with. It wasn't backlit, front lit, anything. And instead of colour or even black and white, it was black and piss. It wasn't a great screen or even a great handheld, but it only gets better and better. The next year, the Super Famicom releases, and the year after that, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System releases. So many people consider this to be one of the greatest consoles of all time, with some of the best games of all time, having classics like Super Mario World, Zelda: A Link Between Worlds, Super Metroid, Mario Kart, Donkey Kong Country. It's fair to say some fantastic games came out on it. However, it still didn't sell as well as its predecessor, having sold only 49.1 million units compared to the NES's 62 million. This may be due to the discourse around upgrading your game console at the time, as most had the mentality of, well, my old one works just fine, as well as the competition from Sega being much stronger this generation with the Mega Drive, as well as having an advertising campaign stating,
Genesis does
16-bit arcade graphics,
You can't do this on Nintendo. Genesis does
16-bit sports action.
You can't do this on Nintendo. Genesis
Does.
Genesis
Does.
Genesis
Does.
Genesis
Does.
Genesis does.
What Nintendo
pushing this console as something more so made for children, for example. But the Mega Drive couldn't use the Super Game Boy, so it's basically worthless. Super Game Boy is a predecessor to the Game Boy Player, allowing you to play those Game Boy games on your TV. So you can actually, see them. Jesus. Overall, Super Nintendo still saw reasonable success. Something that didn't see success at all was Nintendo's 1995 32-bit console, the Virtual Boy. The Virtual Boy was a VR console that didn't have a strap, didn't have eye tracking, didn't have head tracking, it was only in black and red, caused serious headaches and migraines, was marketed terribly, had a weird-ass controller. Can you guess what happened? Yeah, it completely bombed, selling a measly 770,000 units. Around this same time, Nintendo entered a partnership with Sony to create a CD add-on for the Super Nintendo to combat the Sega CD that released soon before. However, mere days before the partnership, Nintendo pulled out after rereading the contract, deeming Sony would just have too much control over the project. So, they decided to partner up with Philips, Sony's rival at the time, yet this project never actually got released. However, Sony wasn't aware of this and talked about their partnership proudly at a public press conference. When finding out about their end in partnership, they were embarrassed and burnt. Due to this, they decided to make their very own game console with the knowledge they gained about game development during their time with Nintendo, becoming the leading company in console and game manufacturing. 1 year later, the Nintendo 64 completely revolutionized 3D gaming. Or more specifically, Super Mario 64 revolutionized 3D gaming. This would be perceived as gaming magnum opus, one of, if not the most influential game of all time. This could never, ever be replicated. Huh. Regardless, this console was amazing, with incredible games that still use cartridges, even though the industry standard was CDs, and the controller was no better than Satan himself, and the game library was like 12 games and sold far worse than the competition, with only 33 million units sold, and the PS1 sold like over 100. And, but other than that, it was amazing. Not soon after, the very first of many Game Boy redesigns released, the Game Boy Pocket. This had a far better black and white display, yep, still not lit, and a much slimmer design that you could still, actually fit in your pocket. It also only used 2 AAA batteries instead of the 4 AA's required by the original Game Boy. Then, the very next redesign came out only 2 years later. That's right, it's the iconic Game Boy Light, the Game Boy Light. Yeah, I don't have this thing, as it's, what is this thing, exactly? Well, it's a Game Boy Pocket with a light, and a terrible one at that. Yeah, this backlight display barely did anything, and was only noticeable in very, very dark environments, along with draining the battery like crazy. Now, if you wanted a true redesign, look no further than the Game Boy Color, releasing the very same year. This was huge at the time, and finally gave the Game Boy something that Sega had for like 10 years. But, this can't play Super Mario Land 2, 6 golden coins, so eh. And right alongside the Game Boy Color came Super Mario Bros. Deluxe. And Pokemon. Listen, there is an infinite amount of things I could say about Pokemon. The fact that it's the biggest media franchise in the world. The fact that some of my favourite games of all time is a part of their franchise. It will just forever be huge. Now, Pokemon these days aren't exactly masterpieces, but these old generations, they were fantastic. Almost all of Gen 1 and 2 were played on both the original Game Boy and Game Boy Color, having only Pokemon Crystal be exclusive to the Color. This console was great, and its sales certainly reflected that, with all Game Boys selling 118.7 million units, one of Nintendo's most successful and long-lasting line of systems. Yet, with their predecessor over the horizon, it was time for the Game Boy to rest. Kinda. The Game Boy Advance, launched 3 years later than expected, originally named Project Atlantis, was pushed as a handheld powerhouse, being one of the most powerful consoles of all time. Yet production costs and time constraints wouldn't allow it, so the project was scrapped. Yet, a few years later, the Game Boy Advance was created using a very similar structure to the Atlantis. Yet enough time had passed for the costs to be lowered substantially. It was an absolutely amazing console with great games, controllers and a screen... Why? Yes, still not backlit in the 21st century, and you need a secondary light to be able to see the damn thing. I'm pretty sure people built empires off of the damn worm light industry. Just plug it in up here and I can actually see what I'm looking at. Jesus. So I think it's fair to say a revision was more than necessary. So 2 years later, the Game Boy Advance SP releases, standing for special. And it certainly deserved that title. You can actually see the screen. A revelation. Something Sega had 10 years ago, but you can't play Metroid 2 Samus Returns on it, so... It hosted this clamshell design, something that would be adapted in their very next handheld. The screen on this wasn't exactly backlit, but rather frontlit. Yeah, you'd only really be able to see it properly in the dark. Basically the exact opposite of any other Game Boy model. However, there was a part revision to this console called the AGS 101 Game Boy Advance. The one I have here is the AGS 001 with a crappy frontlit display. Yeah, the AGS 101 was a full backlit display and looks amazing. But again, I do not have that. As the only real issue with the Game Boy Advance SP was no headphone jack. Yeah, you had to get this damn adapter if you wanted to use headphones with it. There was also a third model release called the Game Boy Micro, having an even better display than the AGS 101. However, I'm sure you could assume by the name, it was tiny. It also only played GBA games, not Game Boy Color or original Game Boy, something the other two models could. But don't get me wrong, the Game Boy Advance library was fantastic and had some of the best games of all time on it. Just most of them weren't GBA games. Yeah, Super Nintendo games were prevalent on this system. It didn't have its own Mario platformer, but rather remakes of the original 4. It didn't have its own Zelda game for the majority of its life, but before the Minish Cap was released in 2005, it was only Link to the Past, the Super Nintendo game. Mario Kart on the console was great, but it was heavily inspired by the original on SNES. That's not to say that GBA had bad games. I mean, Pokemon was great on the console, a whole new generation, and remakes of Gen 1. Zelda the Minish Cap was great. F-Zero, I mean, a remake of the very first Metroid game as well as a whole new one. WarioWare started on the console, Wario Land hit its peak, the Mario Advance series gave us some of the best platforms of all time on the system. GBA was great, selling over 80 million units. However, it didn't last long. As I'm sure many of you know, the very next console on the horizon was about to change the landscape. That's right, it's the Pokemon Mini! Yeah, why not, I've got time. Released in 2002, it had interchangeable cartridges, yet only played Pokemon Mini games, which was only like 10. It was 2 inches tall, had a screen the size of a nickel. Yeah, it didn't sell well. There was no official units of sales, but it's speculated to be in the low tens of thousands. Before talking about the actual successor to the GBA, it's time to talk about the GameCube. This handle was always so funny to me. They tried to push it as semi-portable due to the small size, which was ridiculous at the time, but I mean, compared to a portable now, yeah, okay, fair enough. The GameCube released in 2001 to a mixed reception with some interesting launch titles. No Mario game though. Instead we got his brother Luigi. It was also the first and only time it went up against 3 different consoles. The Xbox, God this thing's huge. The PS2, which is quite literally the best-selling game console of all time, so you know, it's pretty good competition. And the Dreamcast, but calling this thing competition kind of feels like patronising it. A big issue of the previous generation was the fact the N64 used cartridges instead of the discs. Discs were easier and cheaper to produce and could store far more data. However, they were easier to pirate and had longer loading times. But with this GameCube era, Nintendo finally started using discs. Optical mini DVD discs, they called them, but they were really just a proprietary format that were most similar to CDs and the industry standard DVDs at the time in terms of storage. And the controller. Why? While it may seem unorthodox, it's actually an incredibly comfortable controller. One central button surrounded by the different secondary buttons, amazing analog triggers, one shoulder button, sure, and a weird-ass joystick. Sure. Honestly, I'll take anything after the last console. Christ. Some of the best games of this generation released on this console. They just were all made by Nintendo. Yeah, the third-party support on this console was pitiful. Most of it was licensed kid games or the odd AAA release, yet with some weird Nintendo funk. A DDR game, but with Mario. An NBA game, but with Mario. A Soul Calibur game, but with Link. But the first-party games, my god. Super Mario Sunshine, Zelda the Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, Super Smash Bros. Melee, Metroid Prime 1 and 2, Star Fox, F-Zero, Animal Crossing got its start on the console, outside of Japan, Wario World. It's safe to say this console had amazing first-party support, yet it severely lacked third-party. As well as this, it sold even less than the predecessor, only 22 million units. Home console sales were on the decline. Each selling fewer than the last. Something had to change. Nintendo needed change. And they did. Presenting...
So it primarily started when I was a kid because my aunt was really into video games and I would typically watch YouTube videos of Sonic. And I really wanted to play this one game called Sonic the Hedgehog, which is also known as Sonic 06. And I went around her house one time and she had Sonic Adventure DX Director's Cut on the GameCube, and so I took that with me. She allowed me to borrow it because I thought it was the same game, because I saw it had a beach and Sonic Adventure DX at the beach. But that gave me my first real exposure to gaming, mainly Sonic, as well as Nintendo consoles, because I had a Wii at my house that I didn't really play on except for like Wii Sports or anything of the sort. Like I wouldn't really properly play games until that moment. That's the earliest memory I can think of video games. I also remember I used to play a lot on my PlayStation 2. It was mainly the Wii and PlayStation 2 that I played on, and for a short time my Xbox 360. But that was mainly the time that it started, and then after that I kind of just kept playing on different platforms. Like my PlayStation 2, I have a bag full of games, so I would just keep buying them and playing them. Wii especially, I played a lot of games on my Mario and Sonic 2012 Olympic Games, so I have my original copy of that. And before I got rid of it, my Xbox 360. So my Nintendo consoles, I have my Wii. I also, growing up, had a DSi and a 3DS. Now the DSi I don't have anymore because unfortunately one time I left it out on the floor. My mum didn't notice it, so she walked on top of it and snapped it. I remember I played on that for a little while, and then as a make-up for it, my mum and my nan got a Nintendo 3DS for me. They even custom plated it with some different pictures from different Sonic games because I knew I loved Sonic. And I played that to death. I played all sorts, Mario, mainly Zelda, Sonic, Sonic Rush. I played that all the time, car rides at school if I could, etc. That was kind of mainly my main exposure to Nintendo consoles before I got things like a Wii U from my granddad. And yeah, favorite game of all time. Ooh, that's a difficult one. It would probably have to be The Legend of Zelda, either Ocarina of Time or Majora's Mask. They're the games I've played so much that I know front and back. I know where a lot of the different items are. I know where a bunch of the different pieces are. I know the story in and out. It's probably the game that has impacted me the most in my life if I had to pinpoint anyone. Followed by probably Sonic Unleashed. I absolutely love Sonic. Favorite game console of all time would probably have to be the Nintendo Wii, just because of how versatile the amount of games were on it that I was able to play, because I was able to play a bunch of GameCube games as well as Zelda games. So that was the main era of games I was able to play on. So I could play Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask on GameCube, I could play Wind Waker on GameCube. It just had all my favourite childhood games growing up on, followed by probably a more modern gen console like my PlayStation 5, which I can play all kinds of different old PlayStation games on.
And what is your thoughts on the current landscape of the video game market?
I don't think it's the same level as it was when I was growing up, and probably from the 2010s to 2020. I think the status quo of what's acceptable and what's not, and the stories that are being told are very different. The evolution of consoles and the engines that they can use to make games has allowed for people to, or companies to make more realistic games or higher graphic games, which means that companies don't tend to have to work around hardware limitations to create unique art styles. For example, Kingdom Hearts 1, 2, anything before roughly Birth by Sleep. Although even Birth by Sleep, I'd say anything before Birth by Sleep 0.2 or predominantly Kingdom Hearts 3 had a very unique art style to it. It had this like very Disney-esque but still Kingdom Hearts recognizable style. Whereas if you play something like Birth by Sleep 0.2 or Kingdom Hearts 3, it kind of loses that as they made the graphics so much better, which is still good, but I don't like how it loses that kind of style to it, and I think the storytelling has gone that way as well, where they've told a lot of stories, or people want and demand different kinds of stories. It's kind of pushed gaming in a different position, especially with the increase in battle royale games and less genuine story games being pumped out. It definitely is. It's not as good as it used to be, I don't think, in my opinion, in that side of things.
This changed everything. The Nintendo DS was a revolution. 30 years prior, Nintendo released a dual-screen foldable Game & Watch, and now in 2004, this idea could truly come to its full fruition. Announced in 2003, the DS wasn't pushed as the successor to the Game Boy Advance, but rather a third pillar, alongside the GameCube and GBA. Yet, this wasn't true in the slightest. I mean, it had GBA backward compatibility, but it was by all extents and measures a successor. Nintendo was just terrified of calling it that. They would do this frequently, release a new console yet support the old one, as just in case, it didn't work out. We saw a similar situation from the 3DS to the Switch. They hadn't made a handheld console that wasn't a Game Boy really ever. They were scared. Hell, even the Virtual Boy had the boy at the end. The DS was completely new for them, and they were worried, yet it all worked out in the end. Now this design, it's a design. It's weird. I mean, the screens are worse than the GBA-SP. The hinge feels like it's going to snap off. I mean, it looks like a damn tool. This was positioned to be this huge powerhouse of a handheld, and the design reflects it. I mean, it looks like it's from a different planet. It was just that damn PSP. I mean, it just had to be the most powerful handheld of all time. But, this can't play Legend of Zelda Spirit Tracks, so Luckily, a few years later, another one of the best revisions of all time released. The DS Lite. God, this is just so much better. The screens now, which is a lovely change of pace, and I mean the design is much more flush. The only problem is, the design is much more flush. What the hell is this? Yeah, the GBA games stick out now. I mean, it's not the biggest deal in the world, it's just a bit annoying. Yeah, it came with this little filler bit that made the console actually look presentable as well. However, this redesign wasn't the biggest thing to come out of 2006, as that exact same year, something else released. It's hard to understate how huge the Wii truly was when it released. Nintendo finally scrapped the old strategy of trying to beat out the competition with fancy new graphics and win out the consumer. Instead, they decided to create a new one. Everyone. The Wii's most prominent feature was the motion controls. This made it easy for anyone to understand it as it mimics reality. You don't need to press any buttons to swing the tennis racket, you just swang the tennis racket. They decided to push themselves as a brand anyone can enjoy regardless of your situation, so they basically repackaged the GameCube, put it in widescreen, gave it a fancy new controller, and boom, cheap new console. That's how game design works. The use of cheaper parts meant it was far more underpowered compared to the competition. The Xbox 360, the PlayStation 3, my god, this thing is huge. The Wii was a runaway success, no one denies that. However, this popularity wasn't exactly healthy. It was more like a fad, a trend, something everyone had to have for a time. They'd buy the new console, play Wii Sports, maybe pick up another game, and that was it. And if you know anything about the game industry, the company sells the console at a loss to make it back on games. The Wii also had a lot of something called shovelware. Cheaply made games sold to people who didn't know any better. This genre is very common on consoles with large install bases, especially those that don't really know any better, like young kids or older people. So yeah, they had a field day on this thing. This made the libraries seem bogged down by these kind of games, but don't let that detract you from the amazing first-party support of the Wii. Super Mario Galaxy 1 and 2, New Super Mario Bros. Wii, Zelda Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword, Metroid Prime 3, the Wii series of games, and just so much more. The Wii was a huge success, selling over 100 million units and ushered in a whole new era for Nintendo. In this new era, the older DS systems wouldn't cut it. I mean, you couldn't even go into the system settings and go back without resetting the whole system. It needed a redesign. Something a bit more modern with all the features you expect from handheld in 2008. So, in comes the DSi. The DSi was a half revision to the DS. It had cameras, microphones, better screens, faster processing power, which meant it could have proper user interface and downloadable content like the Wii, the removal of GBA backwards compatibility, and SD cards. Wait, yeah. No more Game Boy Advance backward compatibility. Stuck gum in there or something. This was a true sign of Nintendo stepping into a new generation. There was no need to support the old one, and the games had stopped being produced for it. It's a shame they had to get rid of it, as it practically halved the DS library and made certain games, like the Guitar Hero games, not work on it. Then, 1 year later, the DSi XL released. This was more so pushed to older people with larger hands rather than professionals, which is what you might expect for a product like this. Overall, the DS was amazing, having loads of great games, having the first game in the lineup of the new Super Mario Bros. Games, Super Mario 64 DS, 2 original Zelda titles, Metroid Prime Hunter, Animal Crossing, Ace Attorney, Pokemon, and became the 3rd best-selling game console of all time, with a whopping 154 million units. However, when a generation succeeds like nothing they'd ever seen before, it's fair to try and replicate that same success with successors to both handheld and home consoles of that generation, starting with the Nintendo 3DS, released in November of 2011, piggybacking off the success of the original DS, as well as the popularity surrounding 3D movies at the time. 3D was the big new thing, and Nintendo thought of it as the future, so they rushed development of glasses-free 3D technology and built it right into the screen. Nintendo 3DS wasn't exactly a rush console. However, the Nintendo eShop wasn't available at the console's launch, and the launch titles themselves, it was a rush console. However, a few weeks later, Nintendo eShop was up and running, and we were getting some halfway decent games. But this design, I mean, what the hell is this? It's got like a glittery, glossy look to it, and the stylus is at the top. However, this design, of course, wasn't the only one, and it is the 3DS with the most redesigns ever. I had to take a summer class for this. The original 3DS, the 3DS XL, the 2DS, the new 3DS, the new 3DS XL, and the new 2DS XL, because why the hell not? This console was all over the place, but I mean, each new revision gave a new person a reason to buy the damn thing. I mean, the 2DS at the end of its life cycle was £80 with Mario Kart. I mean, Mario Kart today costs more than that. However, this console had some of the best first-party support out of any handheld ever. Just lacked third party. New Super Mario Bros. 2, Super Mario 3D Land, Super Smash Bros. For the first time on a handheld ever, Metroid, Kirby, Star Fox, Animal Crossing, Donkey Kong, Pokemon was so on it. So many fantastic games. And if you know what else came out during this generation, you know this was Nintendo's success story at the time, selling 75.4 million units, almost half of the originals. The 3DS wasn't necessarily a sequel to the DS, but rather just in the same vein. However, for the next home console, Nintendo tried to do exactly that. This console had a single mission statement: to keep the casual audience's attention as well as the hardcore gamers. And to do this, you may think they may have released a powerful home console with its own unique features that doesn't distance itself too much from the Wii while still feeling like a successor for the casuals, while a seamless and simple controller that everyone can use. And with a console like that, what would be the perfect name? Wii 2? Super Wii? New Wii? All of these were rumored names for the console. But what if this console did none of these things, had a stupid name that was confusing to everyone, severely underpowered and overpriced, had a pitiful launch lineup, launch year in fact, awful marketing that made it confusing what this thing was and made most people think it was just an accessory for the Wii. Oh, and the controller had a screen on it. 13 million units sold. You think selling half of the DSs was bad? Think about selling almost a tenth of the original Wiis. That's right, it's the Wii U! The Wii U is many things, but for the most part, it's known as a failure. Nintendo's biggest failure, that is. And I'm sure they've got consoles in the past that sold far worse. The Game Boy Micro, the Virtual Boy, the Pokemon Mini. But these were more so little oddities, strange side projects for Nintendo, not their main next generation console like the Wii U was. But what do I think of it? It's, strange. There's a part of me that loves it and loves its games. Yet there's a more cynical side of me that is more frustrated with it than anything. It had some great games. Mario 3D World, New Super Mario Bros. U, Mario Kart 8, Zelda Breath of the Wild, Yoshi's Woolly World, Bayonetta, Super Mario Maker, Smash Bros, Splatoon. But every single one of those games I just listed is either on the next console or has an equivalent. And the games that are only on Wii U, Star Fox Zero and Animal Crossing Amiibo Festival, anyone? Just a little side tangent, but I think it's funny how the Wii U and GameCube boxes are formatted literally identically. Yeah, try and sleep at night now, I dare ya. That seems a little unfair. I mean, the games released on this didn't know they were going to be put in us a decade from now when they were made. So the first party support on the Wii U was actually very, very good. But that couldn't save it. Nothing could. And Nintendo knew this as they began work on their very next console as early as 2013, releasing in 2017, meaning the lifespan of this console was only 4 years. Nothing compared to others. But it was time to move on, and time to create a whole new era for Nintendo. Presenting
growing up, I've always played games. It's always been a big part of my life. You know, it was one of those things where it was like, it was a good way to escape. You know, it was like if I was bored, I'd play games. If I was sad, I'd play games. Even if I was happy, I'd play games. You know, it was a big part of my childhood. You know, especially like even with my dad when I grew up in Cyprus. We used to play Halo together, and that was so good. It was just like, it really built our relationship, and it made it a lot stronger just because of something as simple as that. And that's why I just think games are so important. But that's how it really did influence my childhood. Me and my friends have this thing where they all come around my house and we play different Wii games, we play different Mario games, stuff all on the Nintendo. And it's really fun. It's a really good bonding thing to have with friends. And yeah, and growing up as well with, I used to have like a 3DS that I used to play, and it's the same situation, you know, it got me through tough times really. When I was bored I used to play it, and it was really powerful. My favourite game of all time would have to be this indie game called Undertale. The reason why I like it so much is purely because of the soundtrack and the messages that it portrays in it. I mean, the soundtrack alone is just so good. You know, it's such a good melody, such a good meaning behind it, and the story within the character development is really good. My favourite console would have to be the Xbox. I mean, yeah, again, I grew up using it. You know, started from the Xbox 360 to the Xbox One S to now the Xbox Series X. You know, it's always been a line that I've followed through just because it's so reliable. You know, it's pretty good exclusives. I mean, I know PS5 has a lot better ones, but you know, it has pretty decent exclusives. It's very easy, very manageable, and it's got a good power to it. You know, it has good quality, good storage. It's an overall good console to go for. I played Xbox loads during lockdown. It was one of the only things I could really do during lockdown, and I'd always just play, you know, like Call of Duty, Minecraft, Fortnite with all my friends, and through that, that's kind of what settled like my love for it, sort of, because that's the like what made me just think, right, yeah, I'm just gonna stick to the Xbox, because I got so handy to it, and it was just it was one of the things that we did, and we literally, I think this was on the Xbox 360, and we'd go through every single Halo game and we'd beat it together. It was a really a core memory for us. Like, I'd always see my dad today and be like, you know, every now and then I'd be like, oh, do you remember we played Halo together? And he was like, yeah, it was so fun and all that. And I was just like, I wish I could go back to that, you know. And it's really sort of mesmerising about how much of an impact games can have on people, you know, and people's relationships.
There is a million things I could say about the Nintendo Switch. Releasing in early 2017, this was pushed as a whole new era for Nintendo, distancing itself as far away from the Wii U as possible, being able to play it in docked or TV mode. This is what the Wii U should have been from the very start, holding basically all of the upsides, adding new benefits like playing it on the go, as well as removing all the downsides like pointless gamepad features. It was truly a remarkable system. A system that stayed around for way too long, not getting a single sequel until 2015, meaning this hardware that was most similar to a console from 2013, which was most similar to a console from 2006, was being sold in 2025, but I digress. This console had some of the best games of all time. Just the same, half them weren't original. Yeah, like I previously stated, a lot of Wii U games were ported to Switch. And don't get me wrong, it makes all the sense in the world to do that. I mean, you take the best-selling game of the Wii U and compare it to the Switch install base, and it's far to assume most people who have the Switch haven't even heard of a Wii U. So, putting these games on new hardware was very cheap and very effective. It just made it a bit less exciting for people who already owned a Wii U. But do you really think that an 8-year-old buying Mario Kart 8 Deluxe really knows this is a 12-year-old game repackaged? Or do you think you just want to play Mario Kart? However, this isn't to say the Switch didn't have great exclusive games. Mario Odyssey is the best Mario has ever been. Mario Bros. Wonder was a great change of pace from the new Super Mario Bros. Games. Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, to me, is superior to Breath of the Wild. I mean, the amount of DLC Mario Kart 8 got, it might as well be its own game. Pokemon was... yeah, never mind. Pikmin, Animal Crossing, Metroid, Mario sports games, remakes and remasters. The Switch had, by far, the best first-party and third-party support Nintendo has ever seen. And if you wanted to stick to your handheld roots, we have the Switch Lite, a smaller, sleeker redesign that can't be used on the TV. If you want a dedicated handheld similar to that of the Game Boy or DS line, they can play all the same great games from the original Switch, then this is a safe bet. The Switch was an absolute phenomenon, selling a whopping 160 million units, becoming the best-selling console of all time, beating out Sony's PS2. And what do you do when you make the best-selling console of all time? That's right, it's the Switch U! No, God no, they actually did love them as they exist. It's the Switch 2. When the Switch 2 launched, there was a lot of controversy surrounding it. It was deemed overpriced, underpowered, lacked character, didn't address the Joy-Con drift from the first Switch 1. And the big problem was the games. £80 for Mario Kart, man, that is just still a hard pill to swallow. Do I think the console and software is overpriced? Yes. Am I going to do anything about that fact and refuse to buy it? This is a day one console. I love this company and the games they make, and so far, there's been some great ones. Metroid Prime 4, Kirby Air Riders, Mario Kart, Donkey Kong Bonanza, Hyrule Warriors Age Calamity, Mario Tennis, Pokemon Poketopia, Tomodachi Life, all in the very first year. First year on the Wii U. The Switch is Nintendo now. There will no longer be a home console and handheld, and it makes sense to do that. Why make both when you can make one seamless console? The first sold incredibly well, and the second one will most likely surpass it. This is their PlayStation, their Xbox, and while it's sad to think we'll never see a new console that changes the landscape like the Wii, like the DS, like the N64, it also means we'll see a more constant and consistent flow of great quality games on a forever improving piece of hardware. Nintendo is a company synonymous with fun. They have made some of the most revolutionary games and consoles of all time. From the early years of the company, trying to find their footing with different ventures, to the boom of the NES and the changes in direction with the Wii and Switch. It is, and forever will be, a forever changing company. Nintendo's always been a big part of my life, too. Like many others, I grew up with a DS and a Wii, and the very first console I ever got new was a Switch for my 11th birthday. The very first console I ever bought for my collection was an N64, and the very first console I ever bought myself new was a Nintendo Switch 2. Nintendo probably means something completely different to you, but I can almost guarantee the fact that you've had some type of experience with them in your life. PlayStation may focus on the gripping single-player experiences, Xbox may focus on multiplayer adventures, but Nintendo, well, they just prioritise fun. I sometimes find it hard to immerse myself in the world with others. I find it fascinating to look around me and see other people just live without any fear or disconnect and just believe. But that is not me. I use these games to immerse myself in other worlds. I step away from our own planet to visit another one sometimes. Video games, and Nintendo specifically, has helped me through so much throughout my life. And this was a love letter to them. It made me the man I am today. So, thank you.